Now to West Asia, where tensions are flaring in the Persian Gulf. It started on the 5th of July. That's when Iran tried to seize 2 oil tankers. And this is where it happened, in the Strait of Hormuz. We'll tell you more about the location later, but first a rundown of what happened. The first vessel was a Marshall Islands flagged oil tanker. It was going through the Strait of Hormuz, heading for the Arabian Sea. That's when an Iranian Navy vessel approached it. It's not clear why this Iranian vessel was there or why it tried to seize the tanker, but this continued until the US Navy intervened. The Iranians left only after a US Navy destroyer arrived. It was the USS McFall. Then 3 hours later, the second incident took place. This time, the target was a different oil tanker. It was called the Richmond Voyager. This tanker, too, was heading for the Arabian Sea. An Iranian ship approached it. The tanker issued a distress call. The same US Navy destroyer, USS McFall, received this call, so it set sail towards the area. But as the Americans got closer, the Iranians opened fire. They targeted the tanker. No one was injured. It hit the side of the ship. And as soon as the US Navy arrived, the Iranians backed off again. So these are two incidents where the US Navy intervened. It says it prevented Iran from capturing these oil tankers. And what does Iran say? It says it was operating on a court order, and that a court ordered them to seize the second tanker, the Richmond Voyager. Apparently, it had collided with an Iranian vessel, so the court told them to capture it. What about the first incident, though? No word on that. Which brings us to where all of this is happening, the Strait of Hormuz. Let's pull up the map for you. You see the Persian Gulf on one side and the Gulf of Oman on the other. In the middle is the Strait of Hormuz. It's the choke point between Iran and Oman, a 39-kilometer strait connecting the two. This is the world's most important oil passageway. 1/5 of all global oil shipments pass through the Strait of Hormuz. In 2019, it was 17.4 million barrels of oil per day. I'm sure it has gone up since then. So this strait is critical to oil trade. And Iran's actions will raise tensions here. Though this is not the first such instance. Such interceptions began in 2018 after the US walked out of the Iran nuclear deal. Tehran launched a series of attacks. The targets were the ships in these strategic Gulf waters. And why are they doing it again? You see, we're just a week away from the 8th anniversary of the Iran nuclear deal. Reports say Iran and the US are talking again, not directly, but through mediators. There are indications of progress too. Even reports about an interim deal. Both sides officially deny this, but both sides need the deal. Both Iran and America have elections next year. Iran has parliamentary polls. And the easing of sanctions will give the regime a boost. The US has a presidential election, and Biden needs to fulfill his promises, including the one on the Iran deal. And they've been hinting at compromises. Recently, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, said there was nothing wrong with the deal with the West. Then the Americans took a step back. They supported a transaction waiver. This allowed Iraq to transfer $2.7 billion of its debt to Iranian banks. So an interim deal could very much be in the works, in which case Iran's action in the Gulf of Oman could just be posturing, perhaps their way of trying to force America's hand. Speaking about conflicts, the US is trying to manage its relationship with China. The visit we've been telling you about is finally happening. US Treasury Chief Janet Yellen is finally in Beijing. She's on a 3-day trip. She received a low-key welcome at the airport, but the moment she stepped off the plane, a rainstorm brought some relief to a sweltering Beijing. But will this visit take the heat off US-China ties too? Well, from the looks of it, it may not. This will be a difficult visit. Yellen has two main objectives: manage tensions and improve ties. So she started by playing the good cop. She stressed on the importance of the relationship and said decoupling was impossible. Also, all Washington wanted was some healthy competition. Listen to this.
I've made clear that the United States does not seek a wholesale separation of our economies. We seek to diversify and not to decouple. A decoupling of the world's two largest economies would be destabilizing for the global economy, and it would be virtually impossible to undertake.
You heard her. Decoupling is virtually impossible, and she's right. These are two of the world's largest economies. Washington is Beijing's largest trading partner. China is among the top 2 holders of US debt. The Chinese market is crucial for American companies, so decoupling is a loss-loss proposition. Having said that, Yellen also criticized China. She said Beijing was not treating American companies well, obviously referring to the recent export curbs. On Monday, China curbed exports of 2 rare elements. These elements are used to make semiconductors, and the curbs did not come out of the blue. They were in response to America's actions. The Americans banned the sale of advanced chips to China. This is how Yellen justified it.
I also made clear that actions we take to protect our national security are designed to be narrowly targeted, and that they are premised on straightforward national security considerations. They're not undertaken to gain economic advantage over China.
And what did China say? I mentioned the weather before, and it looks like Beijing too was tracking it. Chinese Premier Li Qiang said the US-China ties are more than just rain and wind.
So yesterday when you arrived at our airport and got off the plane, a rainbow appeared in the sky. It is a natural phenomenon, of course, and it's something we often see. But I think it should also apply to the China-US relationship. I think there is more to China-US relations than just wind and rain. We will surely see more rainbows.
Well, rainbow or no rainbow, the export curbs were a timed message, a potential bargaining chip in this chip war. Reports say the US will hit back. It will restrict more chip sales to China. So then, what's the point of Yellen's visit? Why is she there at all? She is the second top US official to visit China in the last 1 month. A few weeks back, it was US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. He landed in Beijing and talked tough on Taiwan and Ukraine. He played the bad cop. Then his president called Xi Jinping a dictator. And now they've sent Yellen to calm things down. Later this month, Biden's climate envoy, John Kerry, will also visit China. So there is an attempt to ease the icy relations, but it's not really helping. The ties are at an all-time low, the distrust is palpable, and the interests clash. Officials on both sides may talk about engagement and the need for a working relationship, but their policies do not reflect that. They've been playing a game of tit for tat. So Yellen's visit is mostly about keeping the line open and keeping the expectations realistic. Now let's turn our attention to Japan. It is caught between the devil and the deep blue sea. Japan plans to release radioactive water into the Pacific Ocean. It is treated, but it's radioactive nonetheless. And Japan wants to release more than 1 million tons of such water. For perspective, 1 million tons would fill some 500 Olympic-sized swimming pools. So that's a lot of water. It came from the Fukushima nuclear disaster. There was a tsunami more than a decade ago. It hit the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, and since then, Japan has had this radioactive water. Now they're all set to release it, and the world is not thrilled about it. Japan's neighbors are complaining. They say it will harm the environment, but Japan insists the water is safe and that it's following international safety standards. We told you about this earlier this week. Tokyo has the go-ahead from the United Nations, from their watchdog on nuclear energy. It's called the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency. Listen to their head, Rafael Grossi.
The plan, as it has been proposed and devised, is in conformity with the agreed international standards. And its application, if the government decides to proceed with it, would have negligible impact on the environment, meaning the water, fish, and sediment.
This was 3 days ago. Now Grossi has spoken again, and he seems to be gaslighting his own green light in the most lukewarm of ways. He was asked if some of the international experts behind the report had concerns, and this was his reply.
I heard that being said. I'm not sure, to be honest, that is the case.
So now the UN watchdog is not sure if there were concerns. He says none of the experts raised concerns with him directly, but that he'd heard of the issue. What does that mean? If experts disagree, should Japan be releasing the radioactive water at all? Also, on what grounds were the disagreements? If you dig deeper, you'll see the politics, and it's everywhere, politics. This team of experts that cleared Japan's plan had 11 members, and these were 11 members from different countries, including China. And China has been against Japan's plan from the word go.
Japan has not fully consulted with the international community, especially the relevant stakeholders. In July 2022, it again ignored strong opposition from the international community, officially approved plans for the water release. All these fully reflect their selfishness and arrogance.
Beijing has blasted the UN report. It says the watchdog should not be endorsing such a plan.
We do not endorse the plan or recommend this to be done. We say this plan is consistent with the standards. So I think the qualification is important because they often say this is one-sided. We do not take sides.
It seems like the UN is doing much more than just assessing radioactive water. It is stuck in the middle of a fight. Meanwhile, China has escalated the matter. It has announced a ban on Japanese food imports. Food from 10 states or prefectures in Japan will not be allowed in China. And this is bad news for Tokyo because China is the biggest buyer of Japanese seafood exports. This ban will hurt the country's economy. It will also directly affect the livelihood of its fishing communities. And while China is acting out, another neighbor is taking a step back. I'm talking about South Korea. Seoul was also a critic of the plan. Its people had started panic buying salt. They feared that sea salt would be contaminated once Japan releases the water, so they began hoarding. And prices shot up by almost 30% in the last 2 months. But now South Korea has backtracked. It has conducted its own assessment and it says Japan's water release is safe.
Based on a review of the treatment plan of contaminated water presented by Japan, we have confirmed the total concentration of radioactive materials meets standards for ocean discharge. Therefore, the plan meets international standards, including those of the IAEA.
Japan plans to release the water this summer. It says it is running out of tanks to store the water and space to build more tanks. It insists that the process is safe, but it will need more than a UN report to convince its people, its fishing communities, and some of its neighbors, the ones who maturely express concerns without throwing a tantrum. We haven't heard the last of this story. Our next story is about a public health threat. Alzheimer's disease, it robs people of their memories. It's the most common form of dementia. It's an umbrella of diseases which affect our memory, thinking, and the ability to perform daily activities. As we speak, more than 55 million people around the world have dementia, and almost 70% of these cases are Alzheimer's. It's a devastating disease. It has no cure. But for the first time ever, there is a drug that can modestly slow down the disease. As with most new drugs, it has triggered both hope and controversy. Here's more.
Alzheimer's is a memory-robbing disease. There are still a lot of unknowns about it. So it can seem frightening, mysterious, and daunting, not just to those it preys on, but also to the people who witness a loved one's decline. It can be heartbreaking. But now there is a glimmer of hope, thanks to a new drug called Leqembi that has got a go-ahead in the US. In a first, the medicine slows down Alzheimer's, only modestly, but even that's something, because Alzheimer's doesn't have a cure.
Thus far, we've had no treatments that slowed down or prevented the progression of Alzheimer's disease. What we've had is symptomatic drugs that they help with some of the clinical symptoms of Alzheimer's disease, but they do nothing to slow down the basic disease progression, the underlying pathology.
So how does Leqembi work? It doesn't cure the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. It doesn't improve memory either. It simply buys the patient some more time. It slows down cognitive decline by 27% over the span of 18 months. And for many, this is a big step forward.
Sometimes there's a word or something that I'm trying to recall, and I can't think of it, but now, if I just give it a minute, it pops into my head. It's so good. I mean, it just feels so good. I don't think I was probably able to do that earlier.
Alzheimer's disease is the most common form of dementia, which is an umbrella term for memory and cognitive diseases. Dementia currently affects over 55 million people worldwide. Out of this, 60 to 70% are cases of Alzheimer's. This is world data. In the US, 6 million people live with dementia, and in India, about 8 million, a jump from 3.84 million in 2019. And by 2050, this number will increase to 11 million, an increase of 197%. It's a distressing number, but only keeps up with the trend. Between 2019 and 2050, globally the cases of dementia are expected to surge by 166%, and India's anticipated dementia burden is less than other South Asian nations, such as Bangladesh with 254%, Bhutan with 351%, and Pakistan with 261%. The highest jump in cases is expected in Qatar with 1,926%. So Alzheimer's is a global problem, but for now there is only one drug, which is definitely cause for hope, but it isn't without controversy. For starters, this drug has been approved in the US, so it'll take time to reach other parts of the world. Many say it'll have difficulty reaching even the Americans who need it, because it costs $26,500 annually, and it won't benefit people with more advanced forms of the disease. Most of all, it comes with a number of risky side effects, like brain swelling or bleeding. Now, this is a new drug. It holds promise. It comes with complications, and it's not even a cure. Medical science has a long way to go, because the global population is aging fast, and Alzheimer's is a reality the world needs to brace for.